Okay, last time we completed the subject of Sariputra being the helper of his fellow monks and his own attainment of enlightenment, and that he always dwelt in the state of voidness, 空性, 空单. The next section is on the turner of the will, 转法轮, 转法轮, which is a figure of speech to mean propagating or expounding the Dharma to others. Master Jing Kong Fa Shi, Tấn Kong Pháp Sư, once explained that the will means equality or destruction of afflictions, 烦恼, phiền não, allowing wisdom to arise. When a big, heavy will rolls over something, it flattens and makes everything in its path equal. When it rolls over our afflictions, in other words, when we are exposed to the Dharma, all of our worries, anxieties, and suffering will be eliminated. Then our wisdom begins to grow, and vice versa, meaning that when our wisdom grows, afflictions will get eliminated. This chapter gives examples of Sariputra's most excellent discourses. 舍利弗的开示是开提国沙来佛. Sariputra understood in a unique way how to organize and present the rich material of the Dharma lucidly, clearly, to his fellow monks, in a manner that was intellectually stimulating and also an inspiration to practical effort. It says here that the great discourse on the elephant footprint simile, given by Sariputra, is a masterpiece, and we will see how it is so in a little bit. But it essentially goes into the details of explaining the Dharma. And it begins with the fourth noble truth. And here it says that's methodical treatment. So we will see that we will go into step by step of how this can help us to maintain our progress and to overcome our afflictions so that we can achieve our goal. So this is a very practical masterpiece, discourse by Sariputra. And it explains also how the Four Noble Truths, 是圣谛, tứ diệu đế, exist in everything. It uses the five aggregates of personality, 五蕴, 五ám, as examples for detailed investigation. So this is an example here on this sutra, the greater discourse on the simile of the elephant's footprint. So Sariputra said to a group of monks who came to hear him expound the Dharma, he says, friends, just as the footprint of any living being that walks can be placed within an elephant's footprint, and so the elephant's footprint is declared the chief of them because of its great size, so too all wholesome states, 善法, 听法, can be included in the Four Noble Truths. So the Four Noble Truths are so fundamental that we will see that it is in everything. What for? The Four Noble Truths consist of the truth about suffering, the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the practical way leading to the cessation of suffering. 苦集灭道, 口tập diệt đạo. So Sariputra starts with the four elements of the body. Essentially, the four great elements, 四大, right, tứ đại. So first is the aggregate of corporal reality, essentially the body, the four elements of the body. 色声, 韵, ám, thanh, sắc, is chosen for detailed investigation. It is shown to consist of the four great elements, internal and external. And essentially, it breaks down to the individual elements in order to show us that neither of them belong to a self, 我, right, 自我, 本我, nor constitute a self. This insight leads to disgust, 厌离, 将戒, and detachment regarding the elements, the four elements. So having understood the four great elements neither belong to a self nor constitute a self, so it leads to this type of reaction. So disgust and detachment. Now, we explained last time that discontentment, such as disgust and detachment, contentment, is not a negative state, but rather a very positive one, for it rises above rapture and bliss, right? This contentment is after rapture and bliss, 喜乐. Similarly, disgust and detachment are even more positive. So we should understand that the language that was used thousands of years ago had different meanings than today. Today, when we see disgust and detachment, we think of them as something very negative. But these words were used in a very positive sense because people back then in the Indian society, they saw these as positive because they revere and respected those who were able to rise above the worldly pleasures. In other words, detached from the worldly pleasures. This assertion is further supported by Sariputra's statement below. So tireless energy shall be aroused in me, unremitting mindfulness established, my body shall be tranquil and untroubled. Right? So 无烦恼, 很安静及无烦恼, rất là an tĩnh và không có phiền não. Sariputra did not complain about the world, but he felt tranquil and untroubled. How was he able to feel tranquil and untroubled? Let's continue reading the sutra and we shall see that we kind of, this is another version of it, that when the bhikkhus, monks, when the monks recollect the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, nen Phổ, nen Phà, nen Sung, if his equanimity is supported by wholesome, meaning 善业, right, 体业, does not become established in him, then there will be a sense of urgency. Then he will start to think, it is a loss for me, it is no gain for me, it is bad for me, it is no good for me. So there is a sense of urgency that I'm not making progress, and I'm having this affliction occurring in me. And that is because his foundation is not supported. So when we practice Buddhism, 修行, tu hành, but we don't have a strong support, then the higher we go, the shakier it becomes, right? Because the foundation is not strong. So wholesome does not become established in him, then he arouses a sense of urgency. So when a bhikkhu, it's not that we practice Buddhism and everything will go all right, but there needs to be a method. There needs to be a guideline, a way of getting there. So it's not just random, but there is it's very methodical. So this feeling of sense of urgency is essentially regret or mental afflictions, 烦恼, phiền não, right? But if he recollects the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and his equanimity is supported by wholesomeness, 善业, 体业, then he becomes satisfied with it. He becomes satisfied with it, 感到满意, right? And this feeling of satisfaction is the result of his foundation of wholesomeness, 善业. So the sutra illustrates two potential scenarios in one's cultivation. One is to have dissatisfaction from one's cultivation, 修行, tu hành. The other is satisfaction. The Buddha has infinite merits and wisdom. 皈佛兩足尊, right? 皈佛兩足tôn. So the Dharma is the ultimate truth that can eradicate all suffering. And Sangha represents perfect harmony. So the three jewels are very positive, but yet people who practice Buddhism have different results. There are people who practice Buddhism with dissatisfaction, and there are people who practice Buddhism with satisfaction. But the three jewels are perfectly positive. As Venerable Sariputra explains, There are those who recollect the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, feel satisfied. And there are those who recollect the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, have a sense of urgency, feeling that they are not making progress and inadequate in their cultivation. In a word, dissatisfaction. So, what is the cause for this? Venerable Sariputra explained that cultivation based on wholesomeness or skillfulness, 善业, 体业, will result in satisfaction, 安静, right? 安等. On the other hand, cultivation based on unwholesomeness or unskillfulness, 不善业, 不体业, will result in a sense of urgency, 迫感, 紧急, or dissatisfaction. So examples of cultivation based on unwholesomeness include jealousy, wanting to be better than others, or mechanical practice, 形式的修行, tu hành真行thức. There are 2 points that I want to emphasize. One is that the foundation of skillfulness, 善业, 体业, is very important to for spiritual practice. The second point that I want to discuss is having a sense of urgency from one's cultivation, thinking it's a loss for me, it's no gain for me, it's bad for me, good for me. So this is a sign of regression, 退转. This usually happens to many of us. So let's say that you are happy with your practice and you're making progress initially, but after a while you start to lose interest and motivation. What's even worse is that you get stuck spiritually and have mental confusion. You don't know whether to commit more to your practice or to give up and pursue something else. You listen to one Dharma teacher and they say this, you listen to another Dharma teacher and they say something different, and then you become confused and stop making progress. You need inspiration like you had before, and things don't make sense anymore. The Buddhist principles don't make sense anymore. They seem to conflict and they contradict what you are experiencing. Confusion is stopping you from advancing. Mental confusion is what making you lose your way. We usually find mental confusion in ourselves when we don't make spiritual progress. The reality is, there is no use blaming conditions or environment. For example, I'm too busy with my job. I don't get enough spiritual support from friends and family. I'm too busy with the Dharma assembly, 开法会, 立法會, to commit to the practice, to sit in meditation, to make spiritual progress. Or I'm too busy helping others and I'm not focusing on myself. Therefore, I don't have enough time to sit and meditate, to make spiritual advancement. These are excuses that we should not be blaming on conditions, on the environment. We come up with excuses as to why we haven't made spiritual progress. Inside, we have a sense of urgency. On the outside, we may be very busy helping other people, but inside, we have a sense of urgency, thinking to ourselves, it is a loss for me, it is no gain for me, it is bad for me, it is not good for me, and I'm stuck, I'm not making spiritual progress. So, what has happened to us? Well, one thing for sure is that we have gone astray from the goal of enlightenment. We have lost our way when we have that sense of urgency. So we should get ourselves back on track. When we have a sense of urgency, we should put down the worldly distractions and get back to meditation. Right? 把心带回家, đem tâm trở về nhà. Back to mindfulness of breathing and compassion visualizations, 保持正念, 观想慈悲. The reason that we are mentally confused and not making progress is because we lack the wisdom to see through the distractions. The Buddha says it is the concentrated mind that sees reality when he talked about the threefold study, 戒定慧三学 tam học giới định tuệ. It's the concentrated mind that provides the fertile ground for wisdom to develop. When there is wisdom in us, there won't be mental confusion. We will be able to see reality clearly. 看破, nhìn thấu. We will be able to make progress. When we don't make progress, it is because we lack wisdom to see through the distractions. In such a situation, our mind is being clouded and distracted. Therefore, if we find ourselves in such mental confusion, thinking that it's a loss and I'm not making spiritual progress, then what should we do if we find ourselves in those situations? Again, we should bring ourselves back to the actual practice, sit in meditation, to allow the distractions to die away. Does that make sense? Because we have gone straight from the goal. We've been too distracted by the outside world. So therefore, we need to bring ourselves back. And one way to do that is to practice meditation again. But what if you sit in meditation, but you still feel uneasy? Your mind is not settling, and you're still not making spiritual progress. What should you do then? Well, then you should go back to something more fundamental. That is, you go back to observing the precepts, 持戒, 止giới. There is no use trying to meditate when we don't live an ethical life. In other words, there is no use trying to live an integrated life while living unethically. An ethical life is an integrated life. 生活只有一方向走, right? Đời sống chỉ có một phương hướng mà đi. So leading an integrated life to meditative concentration, because it doesn't allow distractions to build up. When you live an integrated life through observing the precepts, 持戒, 止giới, all your energies are heading in one direction towards your goal. We will elaborate on this idea a little bit later. What I'm trying to say is that the more perfectly we observe the precepts, 止giới thanh tịnh, the more that our personalities will be united, heading in one direction. And there are many types of precepts, such as the 5 precepts, 8 precepts, 10 precepts, Bodhisattva precepts, Sami precepts, Bhikkhu precepts, Bhikkhuni precepts, and so forth. The 5 precepts are the most fundamental. All Buddhists need to observe the 5 precepts at a minimum. The 5 precepts are, as you're aware, abstain from killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, false speech, and intoxication. Probably the easiest precept to violate, 破戒, phá giới, is to commit the fault of false speech, not telling the truth. For normal people like us, in the course of the day, we are not likely to kill somebody or rob a bank or have an extramarital affair to destroy somebody's family. But we are more likely to commit false speech transgression. 妄語, nói vọng ngữ. But what if you find it even difficult to keep the precepts flawlessly? What can you do then to prevent yourself from sliding back? 避免退转, tránh thối chuyển. Is there anything even more fundamental than observing the precepts? Fortunately, yes. Otherwise, many of us are doomed. What's even more fundamental than observing the precepts is the practice of dana giving, 布施, bố thí. There are 3 options for practice of giving. Right? There's giving of material, right? 财布施, 大bố thí. Giving of knowledge, 法布施, 法bố thí. And giving of fearlessness, 无畏布施, vô ý bố thí. For giving of material, there are 2 types, internal and external. Examples of internal giving of material, 内财布施, including giving up your time and energy to help others, such as volunteering at the Amida Society to organize things, to clean or to cook. External giving of material, 外财布施, includes giving your wealth or possessions to help those in need. Examples of giving knowledge include teaching others, sharing knowledge, or training others so that they may be more capable to do their job or to enable them to help others. And then last but not least, giving of fearlessness, such as showing empathy, calming their anxieties and fears, giving them hope and aspiration, and to empower them emotionally and spiritually. Another way of practicing the giving of fearlessness is to fulfill our responsibilities. For example, a contractor signing up to renovate a client's room or to rebuild a portion of the house. The client may not know the process, and there can be a lot of anxiety to try to understand what is needed to rebuild a house. Such to be safe and better after the rebuild than before. Or am I being cheated financially? All kinds of work help to assure the client that he will try his best to meet the schedule and budget, or that he is being fair and reasonable. That will help to alleviate the fear and anxiety of the client. I think we all been that, right? We were glad to have had the help from reliable people. Being reliable is a form of giving fearlessness. Reliability and safety are a big concern in today's society because people nowadays, from my observations, don't seem to value traditions. They want to challenge everything. I'm not saying that's bad, but what is that there are people, if they don't get what they want, they get revenge to destroy what others have or to prevent others from having what they lost. About a month ago, when I was in England on a business trip, I saw on TV of a news reporting about somebody cutting England's iconic and beloved sycamore gap tree that had been around for several hundred years. It was where they filmed the movie Robin Hood. I mean, this was a nation's icon, value, tradition, and somebody just cut off the tree for no reason. Or maybe he did have a reason. Maybe he was angry, but he just cut down the tree that everybody loved. So the incident prompted global expressions of sorrow, anger, and horror. Or there were national monuments recently being destroyed because people were finding them offensive. Or people destroying or burning public places because they wanted to get even with the government or with the people. So people nowadays don't feel safe going out. If we can do an ethical life and observing precepts, then that would be an excellent way of practicing the giving of fearlessness. When we give fearlessness, what comes back to us by the natural law of cause and effect according to the scriptures are self-confidence, peaceful mind, and good health. Just like Sariputra, who said in the sutra, when the practitioner puts Buddhism into practice and it is supported by wholesomeness, 善业停业, then satisfaction and joy becomes established in him. Of course, wholesomeness here includes giving dana and observing precepts. So if we ever find ourselves with a sense of urgency, not satisfied with our progress, even sliding back in our spiritual practice, 退转, 推进, then we should retrace our steps, go back to the basics, 把心带回家, đem tâm mình trở về nhà, so to speak. Go back to meditation, 禅定, 定定, to remove distractions so that our wisdom can shine for us to see reality clearly. Go back to observing the precepts so that our lives can become more flowing in one direction. And go back to giving dana, bushu bodhi, giving material, knowledge, and fearlessness. When we give, we begin to make progress again. Does it make sense? If we fail to sit in meditation, we fail to observe the precepts, then we can always fall back on the options of giving dana, bushu bodhi, because when you give, you are making advancement. But why giving dana, bushu bodhi? Why is giving helping us to make progress? When we give dana, we are reducing our self-centeredness and selfishness. We focus more on helping others. We think more about the needs of others, not just our own. When we reduce selfish craving, we begin to feel joyful and aspired again. Giving dana gives us a sense of value, and it's our value as human beings that we naturally feel happy. Does that make sense? So that's why giving dana is important to our practice. Sariputra said clearly in the Majjhima Nikaya Sutra number 9, the Discourse on Right View, 正念经跟真念, the cause of suffering is craving, selfish craving. And so naturally, when we remove craving, we remove suffering. Because we remove the cause of suffering. So this is another version of the sutra. When thus remembering the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, the monk's equanimity does not endure, he will be stirred by a sense of urgency and feel ashamed that in spite of that recollection of the Triple Gem, in other words, in spite of his practice, he could not remain constant. So not remaining constant here means retrogression, 退转, 推进. And sense of urgency here means mental affliction, 烦恼, 烦恼. But if he can overcome that and his endurance persists, he will experience happiness. So this sutra explains to us clearly how to give rise to joyful faith, 自心信乐, 鸡蛋等鸟, and how to prevent retrogression, 退转. How to generate joy in the recollections of mind and the Sangha, 念佛, 念法, 念僧, depends on not how much practice we put in, but how to have that practice done properly. But there are people that the more they try to observe the precepts and practice Buddhism, the more restricted and suffering they feel. Let me elaborate on this a little bit more to make clear why upholding the precepts 持戒, 止giới, is so important. The Master Jingye法师, 等觉法师, said in a lecture, those who practice Buddhism and ending up with more dissatisfaction and suffering, is the reason for this is because of their misunderstanding and wrong attitude. He gave an example. It's the same water that animals drink, but a cow drinking the water produces milk to benefit her calves and others. But a cobra snake drinking the same water, it produces poisonous venom that kills people, and people feel fearful by just being within the proximity of the snake. Right? So it's the same water, but yet different results. Similarly, there are people we feel comfortable being around. We feel that they are kind and wise and that they produce a positive atmosphere. And then there are people who we feel agitated and uncomfortable being around them because they produce the poisonous atmosphere. The more that they observe the precepts, the more that they judge people and criticize others for their imperfections. They may observe the precepts well without violating any of them, but they don't realize that it's not their observing the precepts that's a problem, or their practice Buddhism that's a problem, but it's their behavior that's poisonous to others. because they being too strict on themselves and forcing others to be strict like them. So that's one extreme where you observe the precepts, but you don't understand the value and you're hurting other people without knowing. The other extreme is not to observe the precepts, claiming that their carefree attitude is spiritual liberation, 解脱, giải thoát. That's the spirit of Mahayana Buddhism, Phật giáo Đại Thừa, Phật giáo. But they are happy. Why is that? Even though they don't observe the precept, but they're still happy. Why is that? Their happiness comes from helping others, doing good deeds. But if they don't observe the precepts, then it is just worldly good deeds. 慈善tử庭. It's no different from the worldly philanthropist organization, 世间的慈善tử庭của thế gian. And it will not lead to spiritual liberation. So the good deeds have limitations and will only benefit a small circle of people. Those outside the circle will not benefit. So when they don't observe the precepts, they may be happy, but it will only benefit a small number of people, a small circle. On the other hand, when we observe the precepts, we always try to expand the circle of our kindness. Like first, kindness towards ourselves, kindness towards friends and family, and then to strangers, and increasing it to include foes and enemies, and finally all sentient beings. That's why it's important to observe the precepts to overcome egoistic attachment. 执取, 執thủ. It's part of the traditional threefold study: precepts, meditation, wisdom, 戒定慧, 约定对, leading to spiritual liberation. If we don't observe the precepts, recollecting the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha will not lead to true satisfaction and liberation, because it's just worldly good karma, 人天福报, nhân thiên phước báo. It then just becomes an excuse or a disguise for enjoying our karmic rewards, 享受人天福报, hưởng thọ nhân thiên phước báo. So if the foundation of our cultivation is skillfulness, 善业与持戒, thiện nghiệp và trì giới, then it will lead to satisfaction, an乐, an lạc. Worse is not to cultivate wholesome deeds. It will lead to dissatisfaction or a sense of urgency, and the mind will not be at ease. So this is where we begin to slide back, 退转, 推进. Master Jingjie said, observing precepts has two functions. One is that it will increase our vow power, 愿力, nguyện lực. The other is that it will guard us from mistakes. 防非止恶, 防非止惡. Some people say observing the precept is not to harm others. So then they conclude, if I'm already doing good deeds and helping others, then why should I observe the precepts? This is a misunderstanding and mistake. If you don't have precepts in you, 戒體, giới體, your good deeds are just emotional. They are emotionally based. For example, let's say that you see a homeless kid and you feel sorry for the kid, so you donate something to him or you try to do something to help him. This kindness, what is really happening is that you help others so that you don't feel guilty about yourself. Right? You see somebody and you learn about Buddhism, but you feel guilty because you are not helping the people in need. And so you're helping them not because you truly want to help them, but because you want to remove the guilt in you. Perhaps your sorry feeling towards the kid is eating you emotionally. And so you're trying to get rid of that bad feeling by donating or helping that kid. Some rich people who have obtained their wealth unethically are not on their own merits. And their conscience is eating them alive. Right? Lương tâm cắn rứt. So they write a big check and donate to a hospital to relieve the pressure from their conscience. So this giving is not giving dana, 布施 bodhi, but is emotionally driven. If you are without precepts for the kid, so you help the homeless kid, but if the kid starts to give you trouble or becomes harmful to you, you will get angry and even want to hurt him. So your loving kindness is evaporated, destroyed, because there is no precepts in you to keep it intact. You don't 没有戒体, right, to keep it intact. But when you observe the precepts of no killing or no anger, for example, you have a goal and a purpose. And so you will not get upset at him. You will not hurt him just because he brings you trouble. Your environment, 所缘境, sở duyên cảnh, becomes universal, including all sentient beings, not just the good people that you like or that you feel sorry about. Right? So it's not just your loving kindness is not targeting at a certain audience, but it's all encompassing of all sentient beings. So that's the value of observing the precepts. Observing precepts gives you the strength and purpose so that you don't get distracted. Your vow to uphold skillfulness, 保持善业, 保持停业, has a strong foundation and purpose, and therefore is limitless as in beings. Its function is to prevent unskillfulness from developing and growing. 反非止恶, 反非止恶. This is why observing the precepts helps us to lead an integrated life, helps us with meditation, and helps us to broaden our wisdom. Does this make sense now why observing precepts is fundamental and important? It's part of the traditional practice of precepts, meditation, and wisdom. So let's move on to the next part of the sutra where Venerable Sariputra explains about consciousness. At the beginning, it may seem a little bit disconnected, but it all ties together. When we wrap this sutra, see how it is related to us. I think this part here, this part of the sutra is interesting because of two things. One is Sariputra defines clearly how consciousness arises. That helps us to understand how we perceive the world. And the second is that it provides a deep reflection to understand more about ourselves. So he says, Sariputra says, friends, internally the I is intact, meaning in good working order that you can see, but no external forms, 色法, sắc pháp, comes into its range, meaning the eyes can see the form, and there is no corresponding conscious engagement. This is 专注, right? 专注. Then there is no manifestations of the corresponding section of consciousness. 没有事, 感覺thức. So in other words, if or even if you good working eyes, your eye can see, but you don't pay attention to what's outside, then there is no consciousness. Let me pause for a second to explain, because the word consciousness, 是, thức, can be confusing because it has multiple meanings. In one case, in the case of rebirth, consciousness means the flow of, and for even worse term to use, but it helps to differentiate because we're all used to it. The English word is called the soul or the spirit, right? 神识, 腾thức. So consciousness is a spirit or soul in a sense of rebirth, right? From the perspective of rebirth. But in this case, in this sutra, in terms of the five aggregates, 五蕴, 五蘊, the word consciousness has the meaning of differentiating awareness or worldly knowledge. 第六识, thức thứ sáu. Okay, so hopefully it makes sense. It's clear that what we're talking about, the consciousness here is not the soul or the spirit, but more of the discriminating awareness. This consciousness is called Vijnana, discriminating awareness. Through the five physical senses and through the mind at various levels. So it's through our six senses. 六识, 六thức. So let's go through the text and we will explain. As an example, that you have a good working eye and you have external phenomenon to see, and that you pay attention, then that gives you consciousness. If the eye is intact and external form comes into its range, meaning the eyes can see it, but there is no corresponding conscious engagement, 专注力, right? 专注, no manifestations corresponding to section of consciousness. So there are two scenarios that Sariputra explains why there is no consciousness, no understanding. One is because you don't pay attention, and the other is like there's no external forms. Should there be the eyes in working order, and then there are external forms coming to range, and you pay attention, conscious engagement, then there will be consciousness. So there are 6 ways to gain knowledge, worldly knowledge, through seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking. So Sariputra said there needs to be a physical sense, like gun, gang, such as the eyes, the nose, and there needs to be a corresponding external phenomenon, 尘, like 整, such as form or scent within range that you can sense, you can pick it up. Then there also needs to be conscious engagement, 注意力, right? 专注力, meaning attention. Then there will be a sense of conscious or knowledge. If we don't have the senses and there are no external phenomena in range and we don't pay attention, then there is no consciousness, no knowledge. Of course, this is not our true knowledge, but it's only worldly knowledge, because we have to depend on these senses in order to know something. In Buddhism, all sentient beings have the ability to gain enlightenment, and once realized, one can never lose it, which is a state of non-retrogression, 不退转的境界, 感觉不退转. So that's why knowledge through our senses is not reliable, because we can lose it. Because we learn something we can forget, will never be forgotten, because it is a state of non-retrogression, 不退转, 不退转. So this brings me to my second point of this topic, how it is relatable to us. Is that if you look at this way, knowledge gained through what we see and hear and interacting with the world, we find out that most of what we know is not ours. It is all second-hand knowledge. We use our eyes to read books, to read news, and we use our ears to listen to what other people tell us. And we think we know exactly what's going on in the world, but do we really? We don't have direct experience, so we cannot say that what we know is truly ours. For example, how do we know about the conflict in the Middle East going on right now? It's from reading books, from seeing the news, right? And did we write the books that we read? Did we go to the Middle East to witness the conflict ourselves? No, we read or heard from the media. So isn't this scary? Because we actually don't know anything if you think about it. And we rely on our consciousness for knowledge, and without which we know nothing. So as we explained last time, that the rational mind has limitations and it's not conducive to enlightenment, because it is not reliable, and what we know, we think we know, is all second-hand knowledge. It's not coming from us. So Sariputra says that if you cling to the 5 aggregates, 五蕴, 五暗, and the corresponding sense consciousness, your shu, your consciousness, then you will produce selfish desire and indulgence, which is the origin of suffering. So that the more we depend on the worldly knowledge, the more suffering there will be. This is not saying that worldly knowledge is not important, but it is in direct contrast to true wisdom. The more that you have wisdom, the clearer you see reality, that will eventually bring to you to enlightenment, a state of no suffering. So the removal of selfish desire, lust for the five aggregates, as explained here, and the abandonment of selfish desire, lust for those five aggregates, 五蕴, ngũ ấm, then that is the cessation of suffering. No, the more that we rely on our discriminating or worldly knowledge, we can end up being more confused. So for example, you go on the internet and there are so many contents and it can be so overwhelming and confusing. This is because we are directing our minds outward for knowledge and we are not relying on our innate nature of Buddhahood. So we think that there is something out there that can make us happy. As a result, we forget about reality, that there is nothing that can exist on its own, unchanging forever. But we believe that there is something out there that we can rely on forever. So this is delusion. The more we direct our mind outwards, the more dissatisfaction there will be in us. So at this point, we should bring our mind back in, 把心带回家, right? Bring them tâm nhiệt về nhà. We should bring ourselves back to meditation, to see reality clearly with wisdom. We need to bring ourselves back to observing the precepts, to be more integrated and conducive to meditation. We need to bring ourselves back to the law of conditionality, 缘起法, pháp duyên khởi, so that we don't get lost in our misunderstanding. For example, your innate discriminating wisdom, 分别智慧trí tuệ phân biệt, knows that this is a tomato and that it's different from an apple. But your sense consciousness, because it's been soiled by the ego sense, 不清净, không thanh tịnh. In other words, by the seventh consciousness, 第七识, thức thứ bảy, by the sense of mine and yours, me and you, subject and object, it tells you that this tomato is mine. Our true knowledge says this is tomato, but our worldly knowledge says this is mine. This tomato is mine. So that's why it brings suffering, because the worldly knowledge increases our egoistic attachment. This consciousness has an emotional content, and it is a course of unskillful, 不善, 不thiện, to the extent that it is ego-based, 我执, ngã chấp. Right? So our true knowledge says, again, this is a tomato, it knows clearly, but our worldly knowledge, discriminating awareness says, this tomato is mine. Okay. So what we should do here is that we need, as part of cultivation, is to transform our sense consciousness or discriminating awareness into wisdom. 转识成智, 觉thức thành trí. This is an important concept, and I hope that it's not too abstract. And I want to make it practical enough for us to apply it so that we can benefit from it. So this is where I need your help and your feedback. Right? Is this something that's helpful? Is this something that's relatable? Is this the kind of topic that you want to learn more about? So this is very helpful if you can provide a feedback so that I can continue to improve the contents of the Dhamma talks. For every lecture, I spend about 10 hours doing research and the preparation. And I thoroughly enjoy every minute of it. And I love doing this. But it will be helpful to get your feedback as well. So when I go through the lectures, I think about how I have understood it and reflect on how you will understand it. Right? So I put myself in your shoes, imagining how you will receive it. And I try to make it as practical and relatable as possible so that you spend an hour here that is not a waste of time, but you can gain something from it. And we can learn something from each other. You providing me feedback, and I deliver what you're seeking. We talked earlier that it's becoming more challenging to live a peaceful life in this world with so much going on. and the world continues to demand more and more of our time and energy. This is making it very difficult to achieve spiritual liberation. If we don't attain spiritual liberation, 解脱, 解脱, we will continue to be stuck in dissatisfaction and suffering. We may realize the importance of spiritual liberation, but maintaining progress is extremely difficult. Sometimes we get distracted and start to drift away from our goal of spiritual liberation, and sometimes we get so overwhelmed, with the worldly life and distractions that we give up. Some people give up because they're so overwhelmed. When we are sliding back, that means that we are not seeing reality clearly. That means that we lack wisdom. We think that spiritual practice is too difficult. So we are lacking the wisdom to see beyond this life. And there is never a safe moment as long as we are in the cycle of life and death. We are constantly liable to suffering even more in the future. So we lack the wisdom because we are distracted, because the mind is not concentrated. So knowing this, we bring ourselves back home, so to speak, right? 把心带回家, đem tâm trở về nhà. We get back to meditation, 禅定与念佛, right? 念佛và tu thiền định. If meditation doesn't work to focus the mind, then get back to observing the precepts. Ask ourselves, are we observing the precepts properly, purely? Are we doing the right things? So at least we are observing the 5 precepts diligently, at least the 5 precepts. If observing the precepts is still too difficult, practicing giving dana, 布施, bodhi, or come and help create an environment for others to learn Buddhism. So in this way, we are making progress again when we contribute. We cannot make progress ourselves. Utilize an environment to practice giving so that we can start making progress again. In the simplest terms, the unenlightened human being is transformed into an enlightened human being. The ordinary human being is transformed into a Buddha. So this will be my final point, and then we will conclude for today. The Buddhist patriots, 祖师大德, 斗sư đại đức, explained that the 5 sense consciousnesses are transformed into the all-performing wisdom because you function through the physical senses, and the all-performing wisdom is the functioning wisdom, as it were. But we're not going to go into the details about this transformation process, how the different types of consciousness can transform into different types of wisdom. We will say, however, that the transformation is not coming from the outside. All that we need for the transformation to occur successfully is inside of us. In other words, it is somehow already contained within the ordinary human being, 凡夫, 凡夫. We have to be careful about this statement, with this statement, as it can lead to confusion. Strictly speaking, it isn't contained at all. It's not really inside us, literally. This is just a metaphor, right? 隐喻, 隐喻, which, if one isn't careful, can make mistake for literal language. So when we say the Buddhahood is within us, it doesn't mean literally that it is in our heart, inside us. Because when we say inside, it is still spatial, 空间, 空间. But Buddhahood is beyond space and time. Can you really speak in terms of something mental that is non-spatial, right? 空间, space. Being contained in something else. It's not. It has to be spatial in order to be inside something. But the mind is not space. The Buddhahood is not defined by space. So to speak of something 空间, 空间, which has location. But here we must be careful not to think of enlightenment as being literally contained within, as though it's already there. It is just a way of saying that if you make sufficient effort, you can realize it. Your potential of realizing Buddhahood It's not that you are already a Buddha, but you have the potential to become a Buddha if you put in sufficient effort. For example, when you are feeling metta-friendly, 慈悲, 德悲, although you still have the potential for hatred, that doesn't mean that hatred is within you as a feeling, but you are unaware of it. It doesn't mean that way. It just means that even though you are experiencing metta and loving kindness, 慈悲, 德悲, on some other occasions, under other circumstances, it would be possible for you to experience hatred. So it's conditionality. We have the potential for both loving kindness and hatred. However, through the transformation into wisdom, that we cannot behave in a way that harms others. And so therefore, we become naturally kind. I hope that makes sense, right? It's not within us already, but there are conditions that when we are still mundane beings, 凡夫, 凡夫, we can swing either way based on conditions. But once you have gone through the transformation, you cannot behave in an unethical way. You cannot behave in a way that harms others. Even the idea of unconscious mind, 无意识, 无意thức, is only a metaphor, 隐喻, 恩由.